Now, this article is about 2 months old, but it was recently posted by MarketWatch. More than a third of millennials polled approve of communism. Wow. That says one thing to me. Our school system has completely and utterly failed. Communism has failed across the board. It's resulted in tens of millions of deaths, and I ask you, go find someone who lived under a communist regime or system and ask them how I feel about it. Now, I think it's fair to point out there are some people who probably thought it was fine, but I'd be willing to bet most of those people are not happy with it. And unfortunately, most of the people who died under it can't tell you how they felt because they're no longer alive. Yet somehow, approval of communism? A third of millennials? Millennials, what are you doing? Look at this story. Here's another one for you. This one's newer. I don't know, what's the date on this one? It's from the 21st of December. We just had the best decade in human history. The best decade. Do you know what happened? I don't know, like 20 some odd years ago, or no, like 30 years ago? The fall of the Soviet Union. Yeah, the biggest block of communist whatever gone. And now, I'm not saying it's related, but we're having the best decade in human history. I'll tell you this. We've lifted out a tremendous number of people from poverty. It's capitalism that did that. Not the corrupt crony BS capitalism. It's this general idea of free market, free trade with regulations that has resulted in a very, very prosperous world. Okay, so let's first read about why millennials are communists, and then we'll talk about the greatest decade of human history. Somewhere, Bernie Sanders is smiling. Now, that's not fair. That's not fair. I know Bernie has been bullish on communism a little bit, but Bernie is about free markets. Okay, Bernie's sort of. He's pretty socialisty, and he gets close. But Bernie Sanders, whether or not you trust him, isn't calling for, public ownership of the means of production. He's calling for like a 20% ownership of employees in major corporations. It's different. It's closer than it's been in a long time. So by all means, criticize Bernie for being close to a socialist, but he's not a socialist. Let's be real. Bernie Sanders calls Denmark socialist. Denmark then rags on him. Bernie is pretty far left. But to actually get to the threshold of socialist, you have to be like, I think it's unfair to, no, I'm sorry. Bernie is pretty socialistic, but the communist thing, I'm not happy with. Anyway, let's read. A new survey released by the Washington, D.C. nonprofit Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation reflects that if the younger generation gets out and votes in 2020, those running for office on the far left have reason to be hopeful. According to YouGov, which conducted the poll, capitalism, amid a widening divide between the haves and have-nots, has plunged in popularity from a year ago, with 1 out of every 2 millennials ages 23 to 38 supporting it. Meanwhile, 36% of millennials polled say they approve of communism, which is up significantly from 28% in 2018. Excuse me. 70% of millennials say they are likely to vote socialist. And this is because they've never read a book about socialism. Is Bernie Sanders a socialist? Technically, he's not, okay? I understand it's fair to point out there are degrees of an economy, like America is a mixed economy. We have a free market with regulation and publicly funded programs, but that is not socialism. Socialism, at its core, is when the public controls the means of production, and capitalism at its core is when a free market, controls things. So I'll put it this way. If all of the factories and all of the businesses and everything were controlled and owned by the government, to varying degrees, you could choose what job you did, you'd be in a socialist system. You can have a socialist dictatorship where you can't work a job unless the machine tells you and you go to re-education camps. And you can have a more freer labor style of socialism where everything is controlled and owned by the government, but you can, fill out a form and say, I no longer want to be a shoemaker. Here's my case for why I should go and work this job. But you wouldn't be able to control what's produced. In our system, we have a mixed economy. We do have some of the money in the free market gets absorbed through taxes. And yes, we can talk about tax all day and night. And then it funds public programs. Admittedly, I'm not an expert on economics, but the difference is Denmark has a very heavy tax. They have a very heavy, social program system. But even they admit they are based on a free market. What these people are saying when they want to vote for socialist is they're talking about Scandinavian-style social democracy, where you can choose to open a business, choose to run that business, and then you pay taxes, a portion. It is leaning towards socialism, but it is still a market system. Socialism is not. It is command economies. I understand there's a bunch of different forms. That's the point. But these millennials don't understand that. And I know because I've talked to so many. They say, socialism's not bad. Like, look at Norway. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, people in Norway open up their own business and choose what they sell and how to sell it. There are regulations, but it is still, a capitalist system where, listen, in Norway, you can save up money and invest in a business and make money off your money, hence capitalism. You see how it kind of breaks down? One of the biggest criticisms the real socialists have of capitalism is that you can make money off money. Yes, most of these countries in Europe with social programs still allow you to make money simply for being rich. Sorry, not socialist. So these millennials who say they are likely to vote socialist think they're voting for, social programs, but what they're really voting for is that you'll be told where to work and when to work and how to work, and after you're done working, you get nothing but access to the pantry. And then when the pantry dries up because a centralized economy seems to fail every single time, you'll be waiting in a bread line. All right, let's read a little bit more. Socialism is a dirty word to the president and many of his supporters. Socialism has shown a decrease in favorability in all age groups except the silent generation. Shown a decrease in favorability? Wait, what? I thought they're saying, okay. And millennials, I'm sorry, silent generation likes socialism, that's weird. And millennials, of which 70% say they'd be likely to vote for a socialist candidate. Here's the question I have for you. First of all, I understand there's a bunch of different ways we can discuss what socialism versus capitalism means, but the core, the means of production, would be owned by the public. Define means of production. What's the scale? What's the capacity? Do you take away my hammer because the hammer is means of production, or the hammer is too small? What if I have a gigantic industrial hammer, a gigantic industrial press that can smash things? Is that now too big to be owned by a person? You see where the lines get murky? And then let's say I make something. Who gets to have that? The socialists argue, well, personal property is different from private property. Okay, to what scale? If I build a small little wheel that gets, the water pushes it and it spins around and then grinds grain up for me, that's personal because it's small. What if I make a really, really big one and it starts grinding up grains very, very quickly, much more than I could possibly eat? Is that when you come and take it away from me? Those are the questions I have for the socialists. And I'll tell you this, most of these young people who believe in socialism have no idea what socialism is, and that's the main takeaway. They don't realize that, no, you would not get an iPhone. You will get a $20 Samsung Galaxy A7 or something with dual SIM and an old, 240p screen. Because no, not everybody can have the top tier high-end stuff. And it's really funny that most of these young people who believe in this they buy MacBooks. It's like, of all the computers you're gonna buy, why would you buy the overpriced brand instead of the functional tool? That's what's mind-blowing to me about these people. They're wholly ignorant. Take a look at this. We just hit the best decade in human history, seriously. They say this, extreme poverty has fallen below 10% of the world's population for the first time. It was 60% when I was born. Global inequality has been plunging as Africa and Asia experience faster economic growth than Europe and North America. Child mortality has fallen to record low levels. Famine virtually went extinct. Malaria, polio, and heart disease are all in decline. You know what? I figured it out. Yin yang, man. Light and dark. For the day cannot exist without the night. Prosperity, it's been too good. The market's been booming, the longest economic expansion in U.S. history. Things are just too good. There must be the shadow emerging. And that's it. You see, the economy tends to go up really well, and then we get hit with a recession, and it goes back up in waves. But the day cannot exist without the night, right? So if things are going too well, eventually you will get people who will rise up thinking the system is wrong because, I don't know, they're crazy or stupid. And then they'll cause those problems because there's always going to be some kind of balance, I suppose. I mean, I'm half kidding. I don't think it's a philosophical, religious, spiritual thing where the universe must be balanced. But I'll put it this way. Things are going really well. We can see it, man. Poverty is way, way down. But poverty is relative. So as you get wealth inequality, you get socialist. And this is why I've been very much like Lefty and saying we should pay off student loans. Because these people are jealous, and people will always be jealous. It's unfortunate. We can do a lot culturally to teach people how to build your own stuff. But then they say, it's not fair that I don't own a factory that makes iPhones. Yeah, well, nobody does. Apple is a publicly traded company, and the publicly traded company owns the factory that makes the iPhones. So great, the public owns the means of production. What's your point? Oh, they want the government to intervene and basically give them a share of the company? It doesn't make sense. Literally doesn't make sense. They're just jealous. I'll tell you this though. I recognize that sometimes hard decisions have to be made, and you have to recognize that sometimes you don't win. You don't win them all. Principally, it may feel better to say, look, man, you made your bed taking these student loans out and going to school, and now you owe that debt, pay it back. Yeah, it might feel good to tell them they have to do this, and it might feel bad to actually pitch in to alleviate the debt. I'll tell you what happens if you don't alleviate the debt. The people just lose sight of the light. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. So they light up a pitchfork and they go and they burn it all down. Now you can say, well, that's wrong and they shouldn't do that. What's your solution? Send out the police to quell the riots as the peasants revolt? Not going to work. I'm sorry. So I think there's got to be some kind of compromise. You got to recognize that there can only be a certain gap between the haves and the have-nots. Otherwise, you end up with a ton of young people who just go around with pitchforks trying to burn the whole thing down and taking it away from everybody. So maybe the solution is, if you've got a growing class of individuals laden with debt, they can't pay off, so they're negative, and they can't find a way to build a home or to start a business because they're in too much debt, perhaps we need to give them that fishing pole so they can teach themselves how to fish. Hence me being slightly on the left. And I know conservatives don't like to hear it because the way they say it is, you made your bed. Okay, great. You go tell the angry people with no vision of a future they've made their own bed. I get it. I think they can pull themselves up by their bootstraps, assuming they have bootstraps. I'm also willing to hook them up some boots if I can. But what happens when you have too many people who feel like it's impossible to succeed? That too many people are living in luxury and they will never make it there. They get angry. And angry people become irrational, and irrational people burn it all down. So you know what? It might not be morally right. It might not be ethically right. But sometimes you have to recognize, listen, I'll put it this way. Let's say you're on a boat, right? And on that boat is a crazy guy who's screaming and waving knives in the air. And he's demanding you give him more food. And you're like, man, we're stuck on a boat with this guy. You might have to give a little. You might have to give a little because you recognize sometimes people are crazy. Now, you can't give too much, right? I recognize this. At some point, you got to tie that guy up and say, he's nuts, okay? He's swinging a knife around. But at a certain point, you have to do enough to avoid a mutiny because it'll happen. So if we want to keep this ship sailing, we got to recognize we concede on some points. We really, really do. So for the time being, things are going really, really great. The best decade in human history, seriously. But why are we seeing so many young people become socialists? I'm going to tell you right now. They were told by everyone to go to college. They were. I experienced it. I said, F you, I'm not doing it. I'm not stupid. You want me to take out how much money in debt? I did the simple math. If after 4 years, I spend $20,000 a year, I'll be $80,000 in debt and I'll have no job. How will I pay that back? I have no idea. But if I go and work at McDonald's for 4 years, I'll make, $20,000 the first year, 22 the next year, 24, 25. Hey, maybe by the fourth year, working at McDonald's, I'll actually have a surplus of cash in the bank. Plus, I might be a manager at that point, hiring those college grads. We were all told this. I did my research and said, no way. Many of these young people didn't. So now they're laden with debt that they were told they had to get, and they're being told it's their own fault when they're too stupid to figure it for themselves. So you know what? I sympathize. I empathize. And I think if you've got young people who feel like they can't succeed, they'll give up. They'll vote for a socialist to come in and wipe their debt clean, or we can concede. We've got to figure out how to solve that problem. I don't think we wipe their debt away 100%. I think we do something lighter, like we freeze the interest rates. Like seriously, no more. Like pay off the principal, no more interest. Pay off the principal of what you owe, and then you're clear here. I think that's the right thing to do. Otherwise, you'll end up with a communist president who's going to give them more. I'm telling you, you got to give a little. You really do. If the Democrats could learn that lesson, then they might actually win, but they won't, right? If you concede a little bit to those Trump supporters, recognize Trump was right in the economy, you might actually win some of them over. Instead, they just screech that Trump is a bad man. The same can be true for conservatives. You are going to continually see the Democrats go insane. Hey, it may work out for you in the end until you recognize you've got to give a little. I'll leave it there. Stick around. I will see you all tomorrow at 10 a.m., podcast at 6:30. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you next time.